Can everyone hear me? I hope so. I can't seem to start my video, so please excuse me not being live, but I am live, I promise. Welcome to today's webinar. It's 1:03, so I think we'll get started. There's a lot of people here, so we'll get underway. So welcome to the Canadian Children's Book Centre's Bibliovideo project webinar on metadata for children's publishers. And I'm so happy that you're all here because this is a big topic and it's a bit of a gnarly topic, but do not fear. We have Amanda Lee here to take care of us. She is an expert and she is going to walk us through it, maybe hold our hand a little bit. Amanda is someone that I've known for a very long time. Her bio says she's only worked in Canadian publishing for 10 years. I'm not sure I believe it because it feels like she's always been here, but maybe it's only been 10 years because she's young. So she's worked in Canadian publishing for 10 years, working on projects focused on using metadata and accessible publishing to ensure that everyone looking for a Canadian book can get it. She works on projects that include creating metadata workflows for Canadian publishers, training publishers in enhanced metadata and digital distribution, managing large metadata website and research projects, creating enhanced metadata for discoverability, and researching the effects of specific pieces of metadata on sales of books and more. I've worked on Amanda with a few projects and I can confirm that she is very good at what she does. So let's dive in, Amanda, take it away.
Thanks, Laura. Like Laura said, I'm Amanda Lee. I'm a bibliographic metadata consultant. I'm a white woman with short red hair and I am wearing glasses. I'd like to begin first by saying that we do have captions being done by Dawn, who is in the chat. There's a link in the chat for real-time captions, so if you'd like those, follow the link. And then I would just like to acknowledge that although we are meeting virtually, we are on land that has been inhabited by Indigenous people for thousands of years. So I'm in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Okay, so in this webinar, we are going to be discussing metadata, specifically accessibility metadata, what it is, why you need it, and how to create it. We all understand, I think, the value of creating content that is accessible to everyone, including readers with print disabilities, especially in schools and educational spaces. This is a question of equity. I'm sure you're all on board with that. However, a space where we're seeing like even the most dedicated publishers struggling is around communicating the accessibility of their books. And that is where metadata comes in. So I do have some slides for you, and I'm just going to share my screen now. Okay, so at this point, you should be able to see my screen. These are pale blue slides with dark blue text. Thank you so much to the Canadian Children's Book Centre and Bibliovideo for designing these lovely slides. As I said, we will be discussing accessibility metadata, what it is, why it matters, and how you can use it. This webinar is brought to you by Bibliovideo and the Canadian Children's Book Centre, and it's funded by the Government of Canada. So first, we should define metadata, just, so we're all on the same page. What is accessibility metadata? Well, fundamentally, metadata is just data that describes other data. Because I do what I do, and because I'm here talking to publishers, what I am talking about is bibliographic metadata, which is data that describes a specific format of a specific book. Therefore, accessibility metadata is metadata that describes the accessibility of that publication. All right, so if accessibility metadata describes the accessible features of a given book, well, what exactly is it saying? What does that mean? Well, a lot of things. So here are some examples of accessibility features. They can include reflowability. So can the text be resized or is it fixed layout? Print equivalent page numbering. Are there numbers in the code that match the print version so students can talk about the book regardless of which format they're reading in? Language tagging. Are foreign language words marked up so screen reader technology can pronounce them correctly? Of course, there are a lot more accessible features than just these three, and I'm sure you can actually think of a couple just off the top of your head. And there's metadata that will describe all of it. We're going to talk more about what that is and how it appears in a second. But for now, I want to talk about what does accessibility metadata do? So those three things that I listed all sound like important features of ebooks. And that's because they are. When we talk about accessibility features, what we're actually talking about are usability features. Accessibility is usability. Accessibility metadata tells readers if they can use, which is to say, read this book. And now, like, this sounds like semantics, but it really does make a difference. Sharing accessibility metadata benefits all readers. Last year, Laura and I, so I'm going to tell you a little story here. Last year, Laura and I worked on a project for eBound Canada about accessibility metadata. Our goal was to figure out if people wanted this data and how best to display it. So we worked with Book Connect to create a test site where we displayed accessibility metadata to users. Then we created this huge survey where we asked people to say, is this useful? What's useful about it? And what would they change? The full report is going to be available on the Accessible Publishing Learning Network in the next few weeks. There'll be a link in the chat at the end to where you can go subscribe to their newsletter so that you can hear about it. If you'd like to read the report, which, I think you should. I think it's interesting, but full disclosure, I worked on it. So yes, there'll be a link in the chat. Go check it out. In the meantime, I do want to quickly share something that we learned that I found particularly interesting. All right, so this is the pie chart. I promise that there are only two pie charts. They're not, this is just one of two, it's fine. And this pie chart is called, do you have a print disability? 50% of respondents said no. 42% of respondents said yes. 5% chose not to answer, and 3% said, I'm not sure. However, when we asked those same survey participants, do you use assistive technology to read ebooks? So here's the second pie chart. It is called, do you use assistive technology to read ebooks? And the answers included a whopping 81% of people said yes. 15% said no. 2% chose not to answer, and 2% said, I'm not sure. So even though 50% of respondents said they don't have a print disability, 81% use assistive technologies to read ebooks. See, in our list of assistive technology, we included read aloud functions, as well as font and spacing adjustments. In other words, no reading system options disabled, and reflowability, which are two pieces of what we call accessibility metadata. To me, this communicates something loud and clear. All readers want to know about these features, whether or not they think of themselves as having a print disability, or whether or not they think of these features as being about accessibility. They might not look in the section called accessibility features, but they are looking for these features. Okay, so what does this accessibility metadata do for children's books? I know many of you here are children's books publishers and you are interested in that specific space. First things first, it's the right thing to do, right? It just is. Communicate accessibility features for equitable access. Okay. Second, it's actually a requirement of the European Accessibility Act, which is going to come into effect in 2025. I'm going to read you a quote now from the Act. This is Annex 1, Accessibility Requirements for Products and Services. General accessibility requirements related to all products covered by this directive in accordance with Article 2.1. Products must be designed and produced in such a way as to maximize their foreseeable use by persons with disabilities and shall be accompanied, where possible, in or on the product by accessible information on their functioning and their accessibility features. In other words, you will need to be communicating accessibility metadata in order to comply with the EU Act, which in turn means in order to sell your ebooks into any EU nation, you're going to have to be sending this metadata. So yeah, it's the right thing to do, but also you have to do it. And then the third thing that accessibility metadata is going to do for your children's books, well, as many of you know, having accessible formats is a requirement for many schools and libraries, especially in the States. Accessibility metadata is what allows you to tell those schools, libraries, and readers that your book is accessible. Another really interesting piece of information from the survey that Laura and I did was that some respondents said they would purchase, check, and then return a book if it doesn't work. This is bad enough for trade publishers of adult fiction, right? Returns are never fun, and forcing readers to jump through hoops isn't great either. But it's worse for librarians, and especially school librarians. They are busy enough. Like, we don't want to add to their work. And also, from a selfish perspective, we don't want them to avoid our books because they don't have time to check to see whether or not they're accessible. Being upfront about your accessibility is going to benefit your buyers and you. Okay, so I hope that I have convinced you that you should consider adding accessibility metadata, because now we're going to talk about the how. First, we are going to get a little bit technical here. I'm not going to go into too many details. If you have questions, do feel free to ask during the Q&A. We've got a pretty long Q&A period set up for you, so anything you want to ask, go ahead. And then also I'll have my email on the slide at the end, and you'll be free to shoot me an email just to say, hey, how do I do this? And I'll see if I can help you out. So where is accessibility metadata stored? When we talk about this accessibility metadata, we are actually talking about two different types of metadata. There's schema.org metadata or OPF data. It's only for EPUBs for the purposes of this presentation. It is contained within the EPUB, which means you've probably only seen this if you make your EPUBs by hand or if you just like ripping files open and poking around. ONIX metadata, on the other hand, is on all formats. It is standard across the industry, and it likely comes from your database or your supplier distributor. You're probably all familiar with ONIX, at least conceptually. You or your distributor send ONIX to your trading partners so that your trading partners will know how to sell your book. You do it for print books and for ebooks. Even if you think you don't, if you publish books, there's ONIX somewhere. You either create that data yourself or you're sending your data as a spreadsheet, which then gets converted into ONIX. There are also MARC records. Those are created for libraries by librarians or library services. We are not going to get into MARC records here, but if you do have questions, I will do my very best to answer them. MARC is a little confusing for non-librarians, but I will do what I can. Okay, so I mentioned that schema data is only for EPUBs and it's held within the EPUB. So what about metadata for PDFs and audiobooks? PDFs, as we know, are challenging to make accessible. They don't carry their own accessibility metadata, but you can communicate the features that they do have in ONIX. The audiobook metadata standards are still being worked on. Audiobooks carry metadata using something called an ID3 tag, but none of it is focused on accessibility features. There are ONIX codes relating to audio, so you'll want to use those if you make accessible audio products. Finally, if you have created an EPUB with an audio overlay, which is incredible, good work, that is technically still an EPUB, and you can communicate that in both the schema and the ONIX metadata. All right, so we've talked about our two types of metadata, which is the schema.org metadata and the ONIX metadata. Where does this data go? It goes everywhere. Everywhere you send your ONIX data gets that ONIX accessibility metadata. And everywhere you send your EPUB gets the schema data. They might not be displaying it yet, but this is going to change. I expect it's going to change soon. It's going to have to change for the EU regulations by June 2025. So retailers and libraries are going to start building accessibility metadata into their displays. We don't know where they're going to get it. It could be schema, it could be ONIX, it might even be MARC. But if you're not sending it, it doesn't matter where they're getting it because they won't have it. They'll have nothing to say. And publishers without accessibility metadata are going to end up with a little flag that says something like unknown accessibility, or worse, publisher has not supplied accessibility information. Don't be that publisher. Send accessibility metadata. All right. In the meantime, there are some places that are currently displaying data. Just as a reminder, everywhere gets it, and at any point, someone could choose to turn it on. In fact, in the last 10 minutes, it's totally possible that Amazon went and turned it all on, and we're all going to panic. So don't be that guy. Don't panic. Make sure your metadata is in place. But in the meantime, here are places that are showing their metadata. First, this is DeMarc's Cantook Station. Cantook Station is a digital library lending platform. It's used by public schools and school libraries. They display accessibility data. So this is a screenshot from Cantook Station. It's got 3 tabs for description, details, and accessibility details. I've selected accessibility details, and so it displays EPUB licenses accessibility, accessibility features, described images, table of contents navigation. And then there's a little expand box that allows you to display other features and hazards, which in this case are heading navigation, includes the page numbers of the print version, and there is a logical reading order to the text. So some of you might remember me talking about these accessibility features earlier in this webinar. These are features that came directly out of the metadata. In this case, this is a combination of schema and ONIX, unless there isn't any metadata to pull from the schema or ONIX. And in that case, this is another screenshot from Cantuk Station. This screenshot says EPUB licenses accessibility. The publisher has not provided information about accessibility. Yikes. Okay. Here is Laley Breyers. This is a collection of independent bookstores, a collective, excuse me, of independent bookstores in Quebec, the Maritimes, Ontario, and Manitoba. They sell ebooks on their website and they display the accessibility metadata for those ebooks. This is a screenshot from Laley Breyers. It is in French, which is a language that I neither read nor speak. So I am going to tell you what the screenshot says, but I'm translating it into English. The header here has a little like guy in a circle. He's obviously, this is like the accessibility icon. And it says, the accessibility criteria for Asha and Baz meet Hedy Lamarr. That's the title of the book I'm looking at here. And then it says EPUB format. The publisher has provided the following information about accessibility for the EPUB. And then it lists 8 accessibility features that this book has. They are all in French, and I'm not going to read them to you, but I will tell you that they are taken directly from the ONIX. They're ONIX worded into French. So once again, these are pulled from this publisher's ONIX accessibility metadata, unless there isn't any. Once again, this is a screenshot from Laley Breyers. It is in French, but translated to English, it reads accessibility. There's that little guy icon again, and then no information available regarding accessibility for the EPUB format. Right? It doesn't feel great. It doesn't look great. Let's fix that. Let's send our data. Another place that displays accessibility information is, of course, the CBCC's Accessible Book Bank. This is a screenshot from the Accessible Books Bank. It reads accessibility, accessibility details, reading order, table of contents navigation, language tagging provided, EPUB accessibility specification 1.0 AA, and print equivalent page numbering. Now, the first 2 websites I showed you included the good, but also the bad. What happens if there's no data? The Accessible Books Bank is taking a somewhat friendlier approach. This is the accessibility metadata on a book which carries it. A book with no accessibility metadata simply doesn't display the accessibility section. Of course, what the Accessible Books Bank is doing is providing links to various accessible formats. So the readers know, readers who need certain features know where to go to get those features. This is a super good solution to the problem we're currently facing, which is that there just isn't enough accessibility metadata, right? The Books Bank is saying, we're going to show you what we've got. And if we don't have it, well, this is a link to the DAISY format, and you know what a DAISY format does. However, we really can't rely on every retailer to do that. All right, I am going to show you another couple of sites that display accessibility metadata. This is Catalyst, which is used by book buyers and librarians across Canada. This is a screenshot of Catalyst. It reads other formats, which is minimized, and then accessibility maximized. And then it reads out the accessibility summary and a few other accessibility features. And then this is the Canadian Digital Library Collection, which is a library marketing tool for Canadian ebooks. It too has it says hide accessibility detail because I've expanded it. If you close it up, it says show accessibility detail. And then it lists out the ONIX accessibility features. And again, more sites are doing this every single day. Now, like the Accessible Books Bank, these 2 sites just display nothing when there is no accessibility data, right? They just show nothing at all. But first, we can't count on every site to do that, right? As we've already seen, we do have sites that are showing the publisher has not supplied. And frankly, we don't want no information to be the default option. It's one thing for the Accessible Books Bank, which is explicitly linking out to accessible formats to do it. But if all sites did this, there just wouldn't be information. There's no impetus to send it. So first, let's start sending it so that we don't show up badly. And second, let's make sure we're actually showing it everywhere we can, because we have to be sending out this data. Otherwise, on the sites that do show it, we will get the dreaded, the publisher has not provided. And once again, I have shared the 2 screenshots from the 2 sites that show negative information about publisher information. All right. I hope that I have convinced you of the importance of sending your accessibility metadata, because now we're going to talk about how to send it. I'm not going to take you through this in great detail. Otherwise, we would be here like all afternoon. Instead, I'm going to read out some steps for you, and I'm going to give you some links. Each of the next few slides will have those links, and then the links will be pasted in the chat, and I'll have them up at the end during the Q&A so you can copy them down. All right, so how do you make sure your ebooks have accessibility metadata? Step 1, you want to create or find your schema data. Now remember, schema is the data that's held within the EPUB. And then step 2, you want to convert that schema data to ONIX data being the data that's in your database and which you send to your trading partners. And then step 3 is you need to enter that ONIX data into your databases. It's a 3-step workflow. What could be easier? 3 steps. We can all do that, right? All right. So step 1, create and find your schema data. First, you do need to determine where your ebooks are produced. If they are produced by a certified accessible conversion partner, they'll send you that schema accessibility metadata. They may, in fact, already be sending it and you just haven't looked at it. So check it out. If they aren't sending it, do ask them to do so. If your ebooks are being created by a non-certified conversion partner, just ask them to send the schema data or a list of the accessible features included in the book. If they don't know what you're talking about, maybe they're not making accessible books. They might be. We might just have a communication breakdown. But if they can't send you that accessibility data, it might be time to double check to make sure your EPUBs are actually accessible. Okay, the third option is your in-house production department. Just ask them to run the EPUB through the wonderful piece of software Ace by Daisy, and then have them share the contents of the metadata tab with whoever deals with your ONIX. Ace by Daisy, it's a free piece of software. It checks your EPUBs for accessibility and accessibility issues. It's also going to show you the schema data, which is what we need for this part of the project. Your production department is, like if you have a production department making your EPUBs, frankly, they're probably already using Ace by Daisy. If they're not, it might be worth checking just to make sure their EPUB creation workflow is ending up creating accessible ebooks. They might be, but it's worth double checking. You can get Ace by Daisy. Again, it's free. It's at daisy.org/activities/software/ACE. And those links will be posted in the chat at the end. Okay, so step 2, you've got your schema data. Now you need to convert the schema data to ONIX data. Right now, any vendor who looks inside your ebooks for metadata is going to know your accessibility features if you are sending that schema data. So they're checking the inside of the EPUB for the schema data. However, anyone displaying from ONIX or any retailer who doesn't accept your EPUB files like Catalyst, not a retailer, but you know what I mean. And for example, the Accessible Books Bank, who is not accepting your EPUBs, they're just showing your ONIX, they don't have anything to go by. So let's give them the data that they need to help describe the accessibility features of your book. To do that, you're going to go to the schema to ONIX crosswalk, and then you are going to decide what ONIX codes you should use based on that crosswalk. The crosswalk is still a work in progress, but essentially it's a list of schema codes and their equivalent in ONIX and MARC, which let's not talk about the MARC. It's going to seem complicated. When you first open that link, you're going to be like, ugh, Amanda, what have you sent me to? But you are going to get the hang of it, and it will be easy enough. A little pro tip for data creators is that you'll want to copy and paste your most commonly used codes into a document that you just save on your desktop, especially if you're publishing series of books with the same formatting. So like an early reader or a middle grade book that they're all pretty consistent. Those are going to have identical accessibility features. Always check just in case, but there's a high probability that you'll be able to just use your list that you've copy and pasted. Okay. The crosswalk is available. I'm going to read you the URL, but again, it'll be pasted. It's www.github.io/publ-a11y/drafts/a11y-mark/index.html. That's your crosswalk. It is an invaluable tool. It gets updated a lot. Fully worth checking out. I promise you it's way easier to use than it looks. If you have questions about it, do ask them in the chat or at the during the Q&A, or feel free to email me and I'll see what I can do. All right, so that was step 2. That's how you take that schema data, you walk it through your crosswalk, you have a handful of ONIX codes now. Now all you need to do is assign those ONIX codes in your metadata. Now, I can't tell you how to add metadata to your database because I don't know what your database is. But if you've got this list of ONIX codes you gathered back in step 2 and you're not sure what to do with them, just contact your database support and ask them where to add the accessibility metadata. If they can't answer that question, maybe once again, it is time to consider whether or not your workflow is producing accessible content and ask your data providers, hey, how come I can't add accessibility information? See what they say. Could be interesting. All right. So now you know how to get your data in place. There are a few potential pitfalls here. So pitfall 1, what if you don't have schema data? This might be because your conversion partner won't send it to you and you don't have easy access to your EPUB files to run them through ACE. Just add what you do know to your accessibility metadata. Is it reflowable? Is it primarily text rather than images? Are there image descriptions? All of that is accessibility metadata, and all of that can be added to your ONIX files. And if you suspect that your conversion partner isn't adding accessibility data to the schema, well, advocate, push back, remind them of the EU Accessibility Act if it's the right thing to do isn't convincing to them. Okay, pitfall 2. What if you don't control your ONIX data? Well, who does? Ask them to include your accessibility metadata. Easy. If they won't do that, well, same thing. Advocate. Ask them why. Ask them how they can make it happen and what you need to do to help them make it happen. Okay. And because most of you here are children's publishers, I do want to bring up a few special considerations for you. First, indicating when something doesn't meet every guideline. Especially for heavily illustrated books, you might have backlist titles or even newer books that don't meet the accessibility guidelines. This can and should be indicated in your metadata using the ONIX data. You'll want to add it to your accessibility summaries. So you might say, for example, this EPUB is not optimized for screen readers, or this EPUB does not have descriptive text for images. You can also use the special ONIX code for inaccessible or known limited accessibility. Listen, I know that we do not want to be saying this book isn't accessible, but we have to sometimes. Sometimes things aren't accessible, and it isn't fair to force readers to do that buy and try game. If accessibility metadata is going to be useful, we need to use it to communicate everything, even the things we might not feel great about. All right, special consideration 2, fixed layout EPUBs. Fixed layout EPUBs aren't like necessarily inaccessible, but they are certainly harder to make accessible. But you do need to communicate that the EPUB is not reflowable using product form feature E201 fixed format, and then by indicating it in your accessibility summary, right? Just like I said, you've got to communicate even the stuff you might not want to communicate, otherwise it's not useful. Okay, the third special consideration for you is schools and libraries. Because so many of your books are sold to schools and libraries, you're going to need to be up to date on legislations and rules around ensuring your books are accessible to students. Continuing to attend webinars like this one hosted by Bibliovideo will of course help, but you can also sign up for the APLN newsletter, as I mentioned earlier, as well as the Inclusive Publishing newsletter to keep up to date. And those links are going to be at the end here. Okay, I hope that I have compelled you over the last half hour to start the important work of telling the world about your accessible ebooks. If so, you're probably thinking like, yay, Amanda, I'm so on board. What else can I do? Advocate. Talk to your data providers and make sure they are up to date on accessibility metadata. Talk to your data recipients and ask them why they're not displaying the accessibility metadata. Talk to your sales team and ask them to tell librarians and educators about your accessible ebooks. Right? Say to them, hey, we're making all these accessible formats. Can you make sure librarians know about them? Great. All right, and that is just about it. Remember, the first step to accessible ebooks is always making the ebook accessible. The second step is this metadata piece. Use your metadata to make sure readers, librarians, buyers, and parents know if your ebook is going to meet their needs. All right, and that is that. Thank you for listening. Here are all of the links that I mentioned in the slides. They've also been pasted in the chat. If you scroll, you'll see that Laura's been pasting them. And now we are just going to get started with some Q&A. So Laura, take it away.
Thanks so much, Amanda. That was amazing. That was
Thank
just
you.
chock full of really interesting stuff. Um, I still can't turn on my video, everyone. So I'm not hiding from you. I'm not wearing my pajamas, but my video won't turn on. So they love you. There's no questions at present in the chat. So I want to just encourage you all to drop some questions in there. Please don't be shy. There are no dumb questions when it comes to metadata. Believe me, because I've already asked them all. I do want to emphasize again that signing up for the APLN newsletter will get you information about this space early, particularly the metadata report, which we're releasing early next week. You'll get an email about that, and you'll be first on the scene. So don't be afraid of that APLN newsletter. It's very useful, and it always has Ship Creek GIFs, which is really handy and amusing. Okay, we have one question from Chris Holmes. Hi, Chris. Nice to see you here. She asked if you can briefly explain how accessibility metadata works for MARC records. No big deal, small question.
Okay, no big deal, small question. The accessibility metadata for MARC records is a little complex because, and I'm trying to get the phrase right, MARC records are attempting to be something called provider neutral, which is to say it shouldn't matter where you get the content from, the MARC record won't change. But what that means is that if, for example, you are getting it from an ebook store that doesn't, or from a library vendor, for example, that doesn't support certain accessibility formats, the accessibility metadata won't be consistent. So, and that, of course, we don't want that. We want consistent metadata across the whole supply chain. So there is some accessibility metadata in MARC. It is an ongoing project that they're working really, really hard on, but it's extremely complex and complicated. I don't think that actually answered your question, but I hope it gave you a window into like why it is so complicated.
And then I just want to jump on here to say that the accessibility metadata report that we're releasing from eBound next week has some sample data in it. So it has sample schema and ONIX and MARC for some simple content, some moderately complex content, and some complex content. So that may be useful to you and maybe a good way to see how to map across the various metadata landscapes. Okay, a question from Tanya. Are schema and ONIX metadata available for children's magazine publishers? If not, will they be?
If your magazine is in EPUB format, Laura, maybe, I don't know, do we do magazines in EPUB?
I honestly don't know that landscape at all. I can't answer that question. Good question. Well, if it's in EPUB format, for sure. But if it's not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so that's the answer. If it's in EPUB format, you do in fact get the same data. And if you send ONIX for your magazines, I know some magazine publishers do and some don't, there are still ONIX codes for that. But of course, the magazine space is a little bit different. But I recommend making ONIX records for your magazines if you can, and then at least you've got some accessibility metadata in there.
Good answer. All right, our next question is from Cecilia Chan at Harbor Publishing. So she has a question about language tagging, and she wants to know how to balance the benefit of language tagging with the abrupt change in e-reader when language shifts. Can we favor fluency over accessibility by language tagging?
I mean, I would say no. I would say you need to favor accessibility over fluency. But if I'm understanding the question correctly, I do think you need to tag up the language. Now, Laura, that might actually be, because that's more of an EPUB production question, I think, about the insides of the EPUB itself, right? Tagging the languages within the EPUB. Am I understanding
Yeah,
correctly?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so what I would say, Cecilia, is this: tag your languages absolutely every time. If someone is reading that content with a screen reader, they can adjust the verbosity of the screen reader and minimize language shifts. So it's not up to you to make decisions about what that assistive technology reading experience will be like. You must tag your languages, and the reader at the other end can manage how that gets read. So I think that that's a black and white question, in my opinion.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate your help.
Sure. We're a good tag team, Amanda.
Glad.
Okay, another question from Tracy. So she's actually still a student and she's taking a metadata class right now. So she was curious about accessibility metadata since she's interested in working in publishing. May I ask you about how you found your way into working with accessibility metadata in this industry?
I am so sorry to tell you that the answer is luck. I I fell into it by caring a lot about metadata, and then somebody asked me, "Hey, but what do you think about accessibility metadata?" And I went, "What?" And then I learned a lot about it. So really, I think because you're a student, all I'll say is just keep an open mind and be curious, and then you'll find your way.
Many of the bigger publishers do have assigned metadata people in-house or
Yep.
data administrators. Some of the smaller ones, those data administrators are wearing other hats as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes the smaller publishers are actually the ones where you go to really learn about lots of different roles. You
That's a
can
good point.
really, wear lots of hats, but so that's just something to consider.
And actually, I will throw one more thing onto that for students. When you are wearing many different hats, or even if you manage to find your way into a metadata position at a big house, accessibility metadata isn't its own job. You'll be doing the metadata work. But if you care about accessibility metadata, then you're already 90% of the way there because you will be convincing your team to help create that data. And that's really important. So I'm glad to hear you care.
Yeah, that's right. Accessibility is everyone's job.
Exactly.
That's my motto.
Mhm.
There's a question now from Catherine who wants to know where you get your ebook made into an ebook. So this is a
Uh,
really fundamental question.
Yeah, lots of answers to that question. I will say that I believe on the APLN, eBound maintains a list of Benetech certified accessible conversion houses. And so those are places where you can contact them and you know that the EPUB they're going to make for you is going to be accessible. Uh, I believe Laura will still make you an EPUB if you would like, but you'll have to pay her for it. Um, and there are lots of conversion houses ranging from a single artisan like Laura through to a much larger conversion house. But a good place to start is by talking to your publisher association or checking the APLN.
Good answer. The other quick thing I wanted to say, I'm going to pop a link into the chat, but if your content comes from InDesign, InDesign has just updated their metadata options just in the last release, I think 19.2 or 19.3. I'm not sure if I have that number right, but you can now export your EPUBs from InDesign with pretty robust schema.org accessibility metadata. Up until very recently, you had to open up the EPUB and put it in afterwards. There was nothing that InDesign did to give you that. So that's brand new, and that's really useful for people who use InDesign as their starting point. Um, so are there any other questions? Please don't be shy. This is about you and your learning. So feel free to jump in. Um, one thing I wanted to ask Amanda, if you have the patience for a question, is the kind of stickiness of the metadata. Like, would you say that there's like a cycle that publishers should go through in terms of updating their metadata, or I wonder if you could just tackle that question.
Yeah. So in terms of accessibility metadata, I believe that if you are doing a series of books where you know what the accessibility features are going to be, right? Like, this is a middle grade reader. We did this last time. We did the exact same thing. Add that accessibility metadata as soon as you make your ebook metadata, right? Whenever that is. It's usually about 6 months before publication. Just go ahead and add that. If there's something strange about it or if it's new, or if you haven't done anything in this format, then you are going to have to wait until you have the EPUB in hand to add the accessibility metadata. At that point, accessibility metadata can essentially remain untouched, right? Unless you remake the EPUB, there's no real need to add to that metadata. However, sometimes the code lists get updated, so there's new information that you can add. If that's the case, you do want to make sure that you update your backlist to match whatever the new codes are. Now, we're publishers, we're all terribly busy. If you don't manage to get to that, that's fine. It's more important to create it the first time than to update it to match. But if you have a spare hour or two someday, it might be worth thinking about. Now, with other metadata that isn't necessarily accessibility metadata, I would recommend doing, a 6-month check to add new reviews, new awards, new relevant keywords, etc. But that accessibility metadata, it doesn't need to be changed unless you change the book. Laura, does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. That was great,
Okay,
Amanda. That was
good.
perfect. Yeah. Um, okay, I have a question from Maria. She is a tiny publisher. What do you mean by database? This is a great question. Do you simply mean an Excel spreadsheet with columns of the different categories? So it is merely a reference source from which to ensure metadata goes into EPUBs one way or the other? So can you address that, Amanda?
That is a great question, Maria. And I fear I may, okay, let's think of how to answer that without putting you on the spot. The When I say metadata database, I do mean a database. Now that's going to be something like CoreSource or Onyx Edit or Books Onyx if you're fancy. Uh, there are lots of metadata database options. If you are working with a spreadsheet, well, then your metadata database is in fact just that spreadsheet of columns of different categories. But who you're sending that spreadsheet to somebody, right? You have that data is getting somewhere somehow, unless you are simply updating it on like KDP and the iBook store using their backends. If that's what you're doing, if you are just using the backends of the publishing platforms, so would you be if you're just uploading to the backends of publishing platforms, then at this point, there's no way for you to get that accessibility metadata out there unless the publishing platforms are asking you for it. This is a problem, and that's where the advocacy comes in, right? Contact Kobo Writing Life and say, hey, I worked really hard to get all these accessibility features into my books. How come you're not letting me talk about them, right? Contact KDP, good luck, but have fun. Contact Amazon and say, hey, how come you're not letting me tell you about my accessibility features? If if you are sending a spreadsheet of data to some sort of ebook distributor like eBound via CoreSource, they probably do have a way to take accessibility metadata. They just aren't sharing it with you because it's a little complicated. In that case, once again, it's an advocacy piece. So go to them and say, hey, I have all these great accessibility features and I want to tell you about them. How do I do that? I don't know that I can answer your question without totally putting you on the spot about how you distribute, but I hope that helped.
And I've dropped a link to Book Connect, which is a Canadian bibliographic metadata
Mhm.
provider. They have a database, and Book Connect is the vendor that we use to create something called the CatDB for our accessibility metadata project. And it is also one of the drivers underneath the Accessible Book Bank. So
Yeah.
they are very good. They understand accessibility metadata really thoroughly, and I recommend them without hesitation.
And without
Maria
piling
says
too
it.
much on the sales pitch, the nice thing about Book Connect is that it'll send your ebooks out as well, so you can distribute your ebooks to all the ebook vendors. So that might be worth doing. Yeah,
Awesome. I didn't know that. That's grand.
yeah, it's super.
Okay, another question from Tracy. Do you find that certain types of books or genres are more consistent with having accessibility metadata than other, like educational resources versus fiction, for example?
I fear that the answer to that question is right now there's very little data to pull from. There just aren't enough people sending accessibility metadata to answer that question. Macmillan Learning is really pushing this. So, and they're a huge player in the space. So at this point, I would say that probably educational resources has way more simply because Macmillan Learning is big and they are working on this. But otherwise, it's a real scattershot situation right now. But you can change that. Let's change that and see if we can make children's books the one. Like you can count on children's books at least having accessibility metadata.
I love that. That's the attitude, Amanda. The one thing I did want to mention is that the EAA is very clear about needing accessibility metadata. And under the terms of the EAA, a publisher or a distributor can get a fine for any of 5 things. So not having an accessible ebook, not having accessibility metadata, not having an accessible website from which people buy that content, not having an accessible reading system, and oh my goodness, I can't remember what the 5th one is. But anyway, it's very important to have fulsome accessibility metadata if you want to avoid getting your hand slapped by the EU. I know that's a little bit overwhelming, but it's really important to start to think about that now because June 2025 is bearing down.
It's coming up real soon, people.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions, everyone? Okay, I have one tiny small question left, Amanda. One of the things that came out in the report that you and I worked on is that there's a bit of a chicken and an egg problem in accessibility metadata. And that's publishers say, why should I write this metadata if it's not exposed? And vendors say, why should I expose this metadata when it's not written? There's also a bit of a gulf between production people and data people. And the data people who write the data are not necessarily communicating clearly with the production people who know the accessibility metrics of any given product in a really full way. So do you have any comments about those things and how to kind of push the industry a little bit forward?
I do. I have many comments about those things. In terms of the chicken and egg problem, I would say that I do think the EU guidelines, the Act is going to change that, right? That data is going to be displayed. And like I said, some places are going to pin it on you, right? If you're not sending that data, they're going to blame you. They're going to say the publisher is not sending this data, right? So that egg is about to hatch, if you will allow me the disgusting metaphor. However, there is a piece where sometimes publishers do need to push retailers, right? We can't trust them to always have the world's best interests at heart, right? Can we trust Amazon to have the world's best interests at heart? I don't think we can. But if we want to push them to make the change, we've got to do the work, and that includes supplying the metadata before they're willing to display it. So unfortunately, in this case, the work is going to fall on us, and we're going to have to take up the mantle. The other piece of taking up the mantle is sometimes you're going to be the only person in your organization who knows or understands this right now. And that's not because your coworkers are, uncompassionate or uncaring. They're just terribly busy, as I'm sure you know. So go knock on some doors, write that Slack message, set up an accessibility channel on Slack. Make sure you're talking to your colleagues and saying to them, hey, who's making our ebooks and are they making them accessible? And can they tell me what the accessible features are? And if that's you, if you're the person making the ebook and you know what the accessibility features are, go say, hey, who's making our Onyx metadata? Do they know about our accessibility features? We've been doing all of this hard work. Are they doing anything about this? And if you don't know who either of those people in your organization are because you outsource them, which is entirely reasonable in a small industry like this, shoot them an email, CC them both on there, say, hey, Amanda, who makes our metadata, this is Laura, who makes our EPUBs. She's going to tell you about some of the accessibility features. You can put them in our metadata, right? It's just about communication and collaboration, which I hope is a positive spin on the earlier chicken and egg problem.
Yeah, that was great, Amanda. That was perfect.
Thank you.
All right. I think that we are sort of run out of questions. I want to thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing what you know with us. This has been fantastic. And I want to thank Bibliovideo for hosting this webinar and putting it on. And I want to thank all of you for attending. This is really well attended. Obviously, this is something that everyone has some hunger for. This is obviously something we all need to wrap our heads around. So Amanda was here to save the day. Watch the CCBC's, the Bibliovideo YouTube channel, which I think Janice posted about a bit. I can put a link in the chat. I'll find one real quick. This webinar is going to get posted there. So if you want to watch it again, if you can't remember what you said or what Amanda said, this is the place to find it. Here we go. Oh, somebody already did. Somebody's ahead of me. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much, Amanda, and to our awesome captioner. Thank you again.
Yes. Thanks so
Bye-bye,
much,
everyone.
Laura. Bye, everybody.